Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 38 of my 2022 reads. This week I read some really great graphic novels as well as DNF'd book. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I finished I Was Their American Dream by Malaka Gharib. This is a graphic memoir that just talks about Gharib's experiences growing up in the US with a Filipino mother and an Egyptian father, sort of the differences between those two cultures, especially kind of like the Catholicism versus the Islam versus, the food differences, dress differences, cultural expectations, all these sorts of things, and also kind of her experience growing up with that while also being American and how different that was, especially when she entered really white spaces as she got older, whereas the kind of town she grew up in was super multicultural, and some of the internalized racism, lots of really interesting just discussions on culture and identity, which I always love. The illustration style in this was kind of fun, but a little bit rough for my taste. But other than that, I thought this was just such a super enjoyable graphic memoir, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Shadow Life by Hiromi Goto, illustrated by Anne Shu. This is a really cool graphic novel that I heard about from Rachel at Colonnati, who I'll link below. And it is kind of a little bit of a kind of horror slash fantasy contemporary graphic story that follows an old woman who is having some health issues. Her family kind of wants to be overprotective of her, but she's decided to just go out on her own. She's got her own apartment and she's trying to manage things, but it seems like death has come to collect her and she's not ready to go. And so she's fighting against that, trying to do her own things, but also fighting against a lot of the ageism that just exists in society and people's desire to kind of control and take care of her where she wants to just live her own life. This was really cool. I loved the illustration style. I loved the kind of funny but creepy atmosphere of this. I loved how stubborn and just difficult the main character was. And there's also just like a lot of really cool stuff, queer romance, all sorts of great things in this story. I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Himawari House by Harmony Becker, which is another graphic novel that I heard about from Rachel at Colonnati. So this is a YA contemporary that is about a bunch of kind of young adults, college age students, who live in a shared house called Himawari House, I believe in Tokyo, and it just follows each of them looking at their experiences. This is very much a coming of age story, and we follow the course of 1 year, and in particular follow one character, Nao, who is Japanese, but she's grown up mainly in the US and doesn't really speak Japanese anymore and feels really separate from her culture, and she's going for a gap year before college to be in Japan, kind of brush up on her Japanese and feel more connected. So there's a lot in there about her identity and is she American, is she Japanese, where does she fit? But each of the other characters has their own storyline as well. There's another girl who is Korean and she's kind of had some frustrations back in Korea, some disagreements with her parents, things like that, and she just wants something else out of her life, and so she's come to Japan to try to figure that out. And there's another girl who's from Singapore, and she's also just trying to figure out what she wants and how to connect and these sorts of things. And there's a couple of other characters too. I think that this was beautifully illustrated, and it had awesome use of language because it would put, whenever something was spoken in another language, it would put the actual words that were spoken in that language, so Japanese or Korean, and then underneath would put the translation in English. And sometimes if the character doesn't fully understand what's being said, they'll even have like little squiggly marks because it's just, they're not sure what's being said. And I think that really conveys that experience of being in a place where you're talking to people in a language you don't fully understand, where you get some of the words but not all of them. It was lovely. I laughed at this so much. I cried so much. It was just super moving, wonderful coming of age story, just exploring family, identity, culture, growing up, all of that. Perfect. Loved this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I did DNF one book this week, which was Goliath by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is sort of a literary sci-fi book set in around 2050 that is exploring a lot of really heavy issues. So it's taking a look at issues of race and class, at gentrification, at kind of ecological disaster. In this world, basically, Earth has become sort of unlivable. There's a lot of radiation poisoning, lots of issues where it's very hard to live on Earth. So all of the people who have the resources have moved up to space colonies, except that some people are also coming back, and there's just this really interesting dynamic between that. The story itself is told through a couple of different perspectives, but it's a little hard to follow at times where you're not entirely sure whose perspective you're following, who's who, what's going on. It's a little abstract at times. It's got a lot of layers, a lot of imagery, and a lot of allusions to other works, that sort of thing. I buddy read this with Kristen at KristenLSFF Reader, who I'll link below, and it was so helpful to read it with her because she got so many of the kind of references and allusion, especially the biblical ones, and this has got a lot of biblical references in it, and so kind of like understanding what was going on. I think this is a great book to buddy read. I got through 77% of this and then I DNF'd it, not because I think that the book is bad, but because I am so squeamish. This book just pushed way too far for me. The descriptions are just really graphic. Just even things like the radiation poisoning causing people to have a lot of issues with like coughing up blood, and so that would often be described, and it would just gross me out. And even just, I got really, I don't know, squeamish from hearing perspectives from really nasty characters where it's just awful being in their head. So it just was too much for me, almost like too intense, if that makes sense. But I think that if that's not the sort of thing that gets to you, I think that this book has a lot of really cool stuff going on for it. Kristen absolutely loved it, and I know that Fraser Simons also loves this, and Angela at Literature Science Alliance has a review for this, so I'll link that below if you're interested. I think that there's really cool stuff being done in this book. Like, I really respect what this book is doing. It's got a lot of very interesting commentary on, like, you know, police brutality and just racist systems and all sorts of stuff. So it's a really cool book, but I just wasn't able to tolerate kind of the level of graphicness and violence and things like that in there. So not quite for me. Okay, that is everything that I read and DNF'd this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in them, or if you want to tell me what you've been reading this week, I would love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.